So good afternoon and happy Saturday to the Ruby community. I hope all of you are having a great weekend. So we're back with another live session with Principal Software Engineer Noman Zahid from EMPG Labs. Today's session also, honestly, is very exciting, and obviously I am always very excited to be hosting another session for you all. So for all of the viewers who don't know who I am, I'm Sabrina Malik. I am the community lead and digital marketing expert at RubyConf Pakistan. Today we have a very special guest speaker. We have Noman Zahid from EMPG Labs. He is the principal software engineer, and also he is the alumnus of PUCIT. So all of the PUCIT graduates who are watching this live stream, here's your chance to show massive support. Noman has 7+ years of industry experience and is currently working at EMPG, like I said, which is the parent company of Zameen.com. Prior to that, he also had been working in big firms, including NextBridge, as the technical team lead. So while we wait for even more viewers to join the live stream, Noman, please do tell us, how did you start your career journey with Ruby?
Well, yes. So back in the day, in 2014, it was all buzz, right? Ruby was the hot piece of cake, like Node.js right now, or any other JavaScript technology at the moment. It was really fun. I had a mentor that I would like to mention, Nazar Hussain. He's written at Lisk. That's a coin like Bitcoin, right? So he's working in blockchain. So it was a really wonderful experience learning Ruby from him and from the Ruby community. As you all know, we have really great community at our hands. If any of you have worked in other tech stacks like Node or Java, .NET, their communities are not that active, not that supportive. But unlike Ruby, it was really good experience.
Right, so that's great. That's great. Honestly, I'm very excited. I would definitely like to get in touch with, your mentor as well. If he's ever up for becoming a speaker as well here for our community, that's
He'd
great.
love to. He'd love to.
Definitely. So one of the questions that, I always ask, always ask my speakers is that what made you choose today's topic? So it's about multi-tenancy. So I wanted to ask about that, what interested you in choosing multi-tenancy?
Well, right now, almost every software is sold as a SaaS-based product, right?
For
We are
sure.
selling software as a service, right? So, and it cringes me saying that it's still most people still get it wrong, right? Their implementation, something is wrong. Every time I see a multi-tenant app, there is something off. That needs it creates a technical debt over the time. Then you have to rewrite it, and it costs you money, it costs you time, it costs you business, right? So if you get it right from the start, then all you have to worry about is your product and your business, and not the technical debt that it creates. So I guess for engineers that are new to Ruby, that are new to building SaaS-based products, I guess that would be a really good starting point.
Right. That's for sure. Okay, that's great. So without further ado, I am just gonna, let you take the screen. You can share your screen and the presentation, and we will just start off.
All right. Thank you so much, Sabrina.
You're welcome. So for all of the live viewers in the audience, one thing I wanted to, mention here. So we did a poll a while back regarding, what do you guys prefer? Do you guys prefer your questions answered at the end of the live stream or during the live stream? So it was a 50-50. So considering that and, what we feel like, the format of the presentation is, what we're going to do today is that after every section, we will be answering all of the questions that are listed in the live stream chat. So Noman will be answering all of them section-wise. So feel free to ask whatever you want. And I am looking forward to the presentation. And Noman, take it away.
All right, thanks. All right, so the first question is, what's a tenant, right? when you're building a SaaS-based product, any entity that requires its own resources, that requires its own set of resources like servers, code base, database, and it is independent of others, right? Like it has no relation with other entities in the system, right? And it the functionality that it requires is the same, right? So anything that fulfills these requirements, it's called a tenant, right? Uh, there are a lot of examples that can be given. For example, a user that is using a Facebook app is not a tenant because it doesn't, it does require the same set of functionalities and it is independent of others, but it doesn't require its own separate resources, right? Because you don't require a whole Facebook server just to use the Facebook app, right? But if you talk about Netflix, and if you talk about deploying Netflix in different regions, for example, UK, Europe, US, right? Um, this is a pure example of a tenant, right? They need their own separate resources. They need to be independent of each other's, in terms of data, in terms of functionalities, right? So anything that qualifies these three properties is should be considered a tenant in a multi-tenant app, right? So, without a further ado, I'll jump into the techniques and the solutions, the approaches that we need, that we require to build a multi-tenant app. So there are quite a few, right? And so I have mentioned 4 approaches here, and there is a 5th one, which is very rare, and I guess nobody still uses that. So we'll just, let it go. So the first one is single code base and single database, right? In this approach, sorry. So the other one is single code base and multiple databases. Like every tenant has its own database, so that data is separated. The third one is single code base and multi schemas. That is only supported by PostgreSQL at the moment, or I think if you use any NoSQL solutions, uh, they might provide this functionality, right? The other thing is multiple code bases and multiple databases. That is basically a single tenant app, and you are replicating a different app for all your tenants, which is obviously not a good approach, but we'll discuss this later. All right, so if we talk about single code base and single database approach, uh, this can be achieved if you have like you have to replicate your tenant ID throughout all your models, right? You have to somehow identify in all your models that this data belongs to a particular tenant, right? For example, if you have a table called users, then you have to maintain a tenant ID across all the tables, right? Users, posts, comments, right? So that when you are filtering data for a particular tenant, it's easier. Let's talk about the pros and cons of this approach. It's really easy to maintain since there is only single code base, single database. You can easily ship it, you can easily deploy it. Obviously, there are more pros, but these were the only 2 that were, really important to mention. So the cons are, as you know, that all the data of all tenants are present in single database and in single tables, right? For example, if you have like 100 health clubs, right, and you have like thousands of members of those 100 health clubs, then your members table is going to be huge. It could be around 500,000 or something, right? And curing or filtering out these sort of tables is obviously a challenge. You have to introduce indexing, you have to introduce sharding for database and stuff like that, right? So that was only this is only related to curing the database tables. The next thing is while you are writing your code, you have to trickle down the tenant ID from your request to your controllers, to your models, and to your services, and to your business objects. You have to maintain the tenant ID that you are, operating on through all these code stacks. And which brings me to the next point, which is data breach. A single mistake in maintaining this tenant ID throughout the request response cycle, can result in data breach. I mean, you can show viewers of Netflix India the movies that are only available on Netflix UK. So that's one risk. It's really easy to implement, and there's a gem in Ruby that you should use if you want to implement that approach. It's called act as. Sorry. So this is the homepage of the gem, right? And it's super easy to implement. That's why I have not included the implementation of this gem into this presentation. But installing this gem makes your life a lot easier. And the point where you have to maintain, tenant ID throughout the request response cycle, it makes your life easier for that purpose. All right, so this is basically a single code base and single database approach. If you guys have any questions, please ask. Feel free to ask.
Okay, so we have one question for now from Usman Malik. He is asking, what's the risk of data breach?
Right. So let's just say you have. Let me give you an example. You are maintaining a tenant ID in a session, right? Or in cookies or something. Or let's just say you have. Let me compile an example in my mind first. So if you get tenant ID wrong in the session, you can show data of other tenant. You can mix data of different tenants, right? A prime example would be, let's just say you have multiple servers, right? And the session were maintained on servers, and somehow, this could happen, right? And this is a real life example. Somehow, on one server, tenant ID was different, and you just proceeded with the request, right? So now once you have set a tenant ID in your session and it is wrong tenant ID, all your controllers, all your models, all your business objects, service objects, they're gonna operate on the wrong tenant ID, and they're gonna show wrong queries or wrong results data sets. So that's and it's basically not a risk of data breach. It's basically data breach can happen because of a human error, because of wrong code, right? In other approaches, even if you make a human error, risk of data breach is very low. So yeah, the actual point would be human error can cost you a lot more in this approach than other approaches.
All right, so thank you for answering that. Usman, do let us know if your query was answered. Let's move on to the next section then.
Sure. All right, so the next section is you have a single code base, and then you have multiple databases. Each database represents a tenant. So first of all, you have a public database that stores information about all the tenants, right? And there can be other tables as well apart from tenants. For example, global settings, global configurations. These are all stored in the public database, right? And then you have your tenants, and they have their own database. Active Record has has support for mentioning multiple database in databases in their database.yml files. But this is only true, and this only applies for when you have like 2-3 tenants, based on regions, based on countries, even 4 or 5, right? But if you have tenants in numbers of hundreds or even thousands, just like customers, right? For example, you have again, you have a health club app, right? And there are 100 health clubs that are your clients, just like Mindbody. So uh, the active record approach of mentioning multiple databases in database.yml, that drops right there, right? Um, so obviously there has to be some way to dynamically search or dynamically change database uh, on per tenant basis, right? So we have two code samples for that. One is a custom built app that changes the database dynamically. I have created that app so that and then there is second a code sample which is using a gem, right? I have created the first code sample to let you guys know that what is going under the hood of the second approach, what is going under the hood of the gem, right? We're going to go through the first code sample and you'll feel that everything is raw, everything is kind of not professional, but these are the things that that particular gem is implementing in a really sophisticated way. So I think let me just walk you guys through first code sample. I'll have to share my screen again. All right, so let me just share. I hope you guys can see my screen again, right? Okay.
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, great. So here's the app, right? We have, let me just show you guys the database.yml file. So we have, this is our public database called tenants_db, right? Um, this database is going to contain all the information regarding multiple tenants that we have. Then we have our models. We have a tenant model, and then we can go ahead and create as many models as we want in that application. But this tenant model is going to contain information about the tenants that we're going to create. One tricky part of having multiple databases is to run migrations, right? If you're not using the active record support for multiple databases, it's going to get tricky. So here I have written a cool sort of custom migrator that runs databases on that runs migrations on all the databases for our tenants, right? So there is this convention that I follow, right? Um, all the tenants, all the tenant databases that I create, their names or their identifiers should be, they have a prefix that identifies that these are the tenants of that particular application, right? It's just a convention, and it's really cool if you follow that. Let's just jump right through into the migrator. I have written it as a custom as a custom rake task, so that it's easier to run through console, just like our normal migrate rake task. So here's this rake task. It fetches all the tenants from the public database, and then it creates a new connection. Sorry, it doesn't create a new connection. It just execute the use database statement to using the new tenant database, and then it uses the existing migrate task of built-in Rails to migrate all the pending migrations into that particular database. So this is migrate. Similar is rollback. So right now, a drawback of this approach is, of this code is actually not this approach, is that it only goes one step forward. I didn't have the time to go into the details of the source code and implement a rollback function where you could mention a version just like you do in the normal rollback task. So if anybody wants to go through that, here's the link of the source code of the database rake tasks. And so basically, if you want your migrate, drop, create, and rollback tasks to behave exactly like the Rails ones, you have to basically replicate this functionality. And it's super easy. If you look into the details, if you look at the code, it's super easy. You just have to, this is for single database. You just have to go through the loop, and run it for all your tenants, right? So the task, rake tasks that I have written, they work if you only move forward one step and only, roll back one step. But if you want that it works like built-in Rails rake task, you'll have to implement these methods. So we have talked about migrations. Now we have to talk about how to switch the tenant when the request comes, right? So it's fairly simple in this approach, right? So first of all, my idea is that I always use subdomains for my tenants, right? If you're using different hosts, then it's obviously really easy to identify a tenant. If you're using subdomain, you just have to use public suffix library. It's a built-in, yeah. So you pass your request.host to this library, built-in library, and it returns you the subdomain, right? And so once you identify your subdomain, what you have to do is you have to execute another use statement, and you have to change the database. And then, so this is the code where you have to reset your model schema. If there is something in the cache, there are information about models in the Rails cache. So these, this code block basically resets that. So it's in the case where your public schema has different, model definition than your tenant schema, but that's, very rare case. So in most practical cases, you can just ignore these lines. So what this code block does is it fetches subdomain from the host, and then it changes the database depending on that subdomain. So yeah. So this is single code base and multiple databases approach. Obviously, as I've told you earlier, that this is all really raw, really not sophisticated, prone to errors. So there is a gem called apartment, which we're going to use to implement all these things in a very, in a really sophisticated way. I have created a code sample. Let's take a look. Let me just open it in my IDE. All right, so I have created a new Rails 6 application. Oh, yeah, so there's one gotcha, actually. The apartment gem is only supported till Rails 5.2, but thanks to our awesome Ruby community, we have ROS apartment gem. There's these guys that forked the apartment gem and provided support for Rails version 6. So it's basically based on the apartment gem, but it's, it works with, Rails 6. So yeah, very good. This is the link. I'll mention in the presentation as well. All right, let's jump into the code. Again, let me just show you the database.yml. again, we have our database called sample apartment, and then we are going to have multiple databases based on tenants, right? Again, we have models. Um, just like the previous approach, we have tenant, and then we have user, just to show you guys an example. So when you install apartment and generate its configuration file like this, what you get is this one, right? There are a couple of configuration options that. So this is a very basic app, so we might not have to use a lot of configuration options, but I'll explain what options I have used and their meanings, right? So these are the excluded models. These are the models that you only want in your public schema or public database. And you do not want these models to be replicated in your tenant database, right? For example, you don't want uh, the information about all the tenants in one of your tenant database. So yeah, and you don't want information about global configurations or global settings in all of your tenants databases. So this is something that you should define here, right? Then we have tenant names. You have to mention to apartment that what are your tenants, right? And you can use Lambda for that if you have multiple tenant. The other approaches are you can just simply pass an array. You can pass, a host, a hash with tenant names and their database configuration, right? So if you pass a Lambda or just an array, they're going to use the database configuration mentioned in the database.yml apart from the database name, right? And then, so once you have configured this portion, we are good to go, right? We can just run rate db migrate, and it will run migrations in all our databases. Uh, if we run rate db rollback, it's going to roll back a particular migration in all our databases, and it has version support as well, right? Like if you run rate db rollback with a particular version, it's going to roll back to that particular version in all the tenants databases, right? There are a couple of gotchas about PostgreSQL and MySQL. I'll come back to those later. Next thing is, how do we identify our tenant, right? So they have, a couple of really sweet identifiers, really sweet approaches to identify your tenant. First one is generic. They just give you with, a code block, and you can, just implement your own way of identifying a tenant. It could be based on host, it could be based on session, it could be based on, user ID or something, whatever it is. If you have a custom logic of, identifying a tenant, you can implement it there, right? And that this is, they have named it generic, right? Then they have domain, right? Identifying tenant based on the domain that you are hosting your application on. Then we have subdomain, and then we have first subdomain. So difference in these is, really self-explanatory. First subdomain only checks on, the first part of the subdomain. For example, if you have demo.api.myapartmentapp.local, right? So it's going to check on the demo is going to be the identifier of the tenant. But if you are using subdomain and you have demo.api.yourapp.com, so then it's going to be demo.api is going to be the identifier of the tenant. So that's basically the difference in between these two approaches. Then you have your host, method of identifying your tenant. It's also pretty self-explanatory. You can identify your tenant based on the host, based on the server that you're hosting your application on. And there, you can see the implementation of each of these, elevators. It's really simple. It's really, self-explanatory. let me give you guys an example. So if we look at the tenant model, uh, once you create a tenant, you'll have to tell apartment that, I have created a tenant and uh, this is its identifier. So I have set up an after create callback that generates the apartment tenant, right? So I'm in the console. I'm going to create a new tenant. But let's just call it, and let's just assume that his subdomain is WFP, or we could just use webmaster. So as you can see that it inserted an entry into the sample apartment database that represents our tenant, right? It created a database called wellness, the identifier that we use to identify the tenants. It and then it inserted the migrations, right? The values that we need to run, the further migration that we need to run on this database, and it returned your regular tenant object. So the next step is to run our migrations so that this new DB is up to speed, where our other tenant databases are. All right. So as you can see, um, it just shows you that it has migrated for all the tenants, right? We have one for RubyConf, we have one for Wellness. All right. So let's just start this application. All right, the server is already running. I have created a sample entry in my host file so that this domain works, and this points to the local host on which my server is running. All right, so let's just create a new user. All right, so since I was using RubyConf, let's just dive into our databases and see that it has correctly created users into the correct database. All right, as you can see, we have this table called users, right? And then we have so first of all, you can see there are no tenants in the tenant database, right? Now let's check users. Sorry. All right, so the user we created is correctly created in the RubyConf database, right? Just to make sure that it's not created in the public schema as well. So first of all, verify that we have all the tenants in here. All right, as you can see, we created two tenants and two tenants are available in there, right? Let's just check the users. All right, the public database is users table is empty, which is correct. So as you can see, this is a really sophisticated approach. This is clean, understandable code. You don't have to write much stuff yourself. So the only reason that I created the first sample was just to let you guys know that what's going on under the hood of this gem. they're basically creating custom migrators. They're basically creating modules for identifying tenants based on subdomain, based on host, based on first subdomain, etc., etc. So if anybody has questions regarding this approach, please share.
Yes, so we do have a question from Kashif Umair Liaquat. He's also one of our very core community members. So he's asking, should we have all the database configurations in our database.yml file?
No, so not in this approach, right? If you're using Apartment Gem, you don't have to mention all your databases information in your database.yml file. But if you're using, you can use multiple databases with that approach as well. For example, if you have 2-3 databases and you don't want to use the Apartment Gem for some reason, right? You can mention that, then you can mention all your databases in the database.yml file, and it will take care of the migrations and rollback stuff itself, the active record. I hope that answers the question.
All right, great. Thank you for answering that. We also have a comment from GS Shahid. He is saying we can also use lvh.me for working with subdomains locally. For example, subdomain, and he has just listed the link.
Yeah, that's true. But I just wanted to show you, an example that has some meaning on it. lvh.me doesn't have a meaning, but rubyconf.myapartment.local has meaning, right? So that's the only reason that I use this. But you are correct. We can use lvh.me as well.
Okay, that's great. Kashif is also saying, thank you, Numan, for answering his query.
That's great. So let's move to the next section.
Yes, for sure.
Which is, yeah. So I have a couple of gotchas, and these are, from my personal experience. If you're using Amazon RDS or any other service, for maintaining your databases, then you have to take care of the backups of the tenant databases yourself, right? Because once you're creating an RDS instance, you create one database with that by default, and you use that database as your public database, right? But the backups that you set up for that RDS instance only takes backup of the public database. I'm not sure that it takes the backup of the tenant databases. So you have to set those up yourself. So this is the thing that I have been run into lately, and it's been causing a lot of nightmares. So yeah, just a heads up.
Right. Okay, so we do have another question from Hassan Ahmed. In a production setup where in a non-tenant based architecture, a database is hosted on a single RDS instance, how do we go about addressing this for multiple databases?
Yeah, so if you have created an instance, RDS instance, it allows you to create multiple databases on that particular instance, right? It just doesn't take the backups, right? And this is a really good question. As you can see, that having this approach still has some hassles, some backdrops that we have to look into, which brings me to the next topic, which brings me to the next section. That let's just dive into it. I hope that section will answer all those questions.
All right, sounds good.
All right, so the pros and cons are pretty self-explanatory. As you know, the tenants data is distributed across multiple databases. We have smaller set of data which are easier to query, easier to process. And then the cons are you can't use this approach with free tier services like Heroku. since they only allow you to create, one databases per instance, right? So that's drawback. Uh, let's move to our next topic. You guys asked really good questions regarding the use of Amazon or any other services for our database host, which brings me to the next topic, which is we are going to use single code base and we are going to use multiple schemas, right? And this feature is only supported in PostgreSQL. If we talk about relational databases, it is only supported in PostgreSQL at the moment. And we are going to use the same apart from Gem as well. What it does is, instead of creating multiple databases, you have one public schema where you have all your tenants' information, and then you have multiple, tenant schemas where in one database, right? Where you have data regarding your tenants. So I guess this is the most sophisticated approach because it helps you with, since one RDS instance has only one database, the backups are really easier. It's easier to upgrade your database. For example, if you have multiple databases and then you want to upgrade from 526 to 8, right? You have a lot of stuff to do, right? Because you have to translate every database into, to support MySQL 8, right? But if you have one database, it's really easier, right? So comparison between these two approaches is basically, the long going debate of using multiple databases versus multiple schemas. Some would say multiple schemas are fast, they're easier to switch, they're faster to switch. But I have searched, but nobody has come up with, actual stats, actual figures, actual proof of this basically the claim, right? All right, so these were the approaches, but right now we have only discussed single code base, right? What if there is a situation where one particular tenant requires, a set of functionality which is not required by the others, right? For example, one tenant wants a payment method. For example, you have Stripe as your payment method, but one tenant says Stripe doesn't operate in our country. We have to have, HP MasterCard or something. So what should we do in these sort of cases? One thing is we copy that code base into another code base, implement HP MasterCard, and ship it, right? But now we have two different code bases to maintain. If we, create one feature that needs to be shipped to both tenants, we have to deploy it twice to two different servers. Now here comes, feature flags. It's everybody is familiar with this, but I think it's worth mentioning here. These are just, Boolean flags that, tells you that a particular feature is, turned on or off for a particular tenant, right? It saves you a lot of hassle, and every feature in your multi-tenant app should be behind a feature flag. Every feature should, ideally, you should be able to turn on or off every feature, right? From an interface, from a user interface. There are a particular gotchas that you shouldn't do with feature flags. Some people, I'm not saying a lot of people, but some people store feature flags and configurations in env files. This is not correct. Turning on or off a feature should not require a deployment. It should be done without a deployment, without a code change. So yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. Here's a banana. Sorry for the long post.
Right.
All right.
So that's great. I really like how you ended the presentation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So We actually were having, so I was looking at the comments section, and we were actually having like a very long debate regarding, like using multiple databases and everything like that. So, I mean, if you want to go through that, that would be, that's something that we can do while we wait for more questions, if any. GS Shahid is saying, thanks, Noman. Can you share the link of the presentation? Definitely, GS Shahid, we will
Sure.
share the link in the description, video description. So there's that. So one of the things that, like I was going through, like I said in the chat, that there is like a huge debate. So I like, maybe you can kind of like weigh in on what you think is better. So while we were talking about, data breach and the risks that it entails. So Kamaluddin was saying, I think it is not about data breach, but as it is all in one data. So it can be very risky to have all SaaS clients data placed in one, database and everything like that. So Asad Iqbal weighed in. He said, it's an extremely common practice. Some companies may create a separate database for their security conscious clients. Moreover, Kamal again weighed in. He said that dividing database with a tenant is complicated and expensive, but Asad commented it's not scalable. So the debate honestly is going on. So what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. So that is correct. I wouldn't say it as a data breach, but if you think about in terms of users, right, in terms of businesses, if one tenant is seeing data of other tenant, that's basically a data breach to them, right?
Right.
It's not technically a data breach because nobody got into your database or your server. It's not technically a data breach, but for the businesses, it's a data breach, right? Their data was compromised. I was talking about the human error, the code error that could result in, intermingling of two tenants' data, right?
Right.
And it happened, right? It has happened to, multiple people, multiple apps. I guess it happened to Apple as well. You were seeing docs of, other people in your drives. So yeah,
Oh, wow.
uh, I guess that answers the question. It's not technically a data breach, but if you think of in terms of business, it is a data breach. I mean, you can't explain to a business that it's not a data breach.
Yeah,
It was a human error, right? Yeah.
for sure. That definitely does make sense, a lot of sense. So let's see if we have any more questions for Noman. Guys, do let me know. Moving on, honestly, Noman, I feel like, the way you did your presentation, like, with the code samples and the live demo, that was pretty, impressive, to be very honest. Because while I do talk to a lot of like, our live viewers and people who are regular watchers of our webinar sessions, they definitely do enjoy when there is a live demo. So the more resources that a speaker brings into their webinar session, the more valuable it is for them. So kudos to you.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
One last thing I want to say is
Yes.
it's really an honor for me to present to this community of Ruby enthusiasts, and I'm really thankful to RubyConf Pakistan for letting me speak here. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's so sweet of you. Thank you. Well, we do try to, so two things that we're trying to do as RubyConf Pakistan is that one, we want as many contributors in the community as possible. Two, we definitely do want to have the viewers connect with the speakers and kind of like, make it kind of a networking kind of a platform. You can say that, people can connect with one another, that, the Ruby enthusiasts in Pakistan, they kind of, like know one another, this person is from EMPG, this person is from, let's say, Nextbridge,
Yeah.
this person. So it kind of gives you that, like safe space and community that, you can ask, you can take guidance, you can take mentorship, whatever it is. That's why, we try to, do all of these sessions as well. So Zaryab Riaz, he is also saying, thanks for this informative session.
Cool stuff.
Right. So let's move on towards the closure of the presentation and the webinar session. I don't think we have any further questions. if yes, do let us know. We are just about to end the live stream, guys. So let me know if you have any further questions from Noman. For everyone who tuned in to the live stream, a major thank you. It's honestly because of you guys that we are yet, doing all of these sessions. It's almost a year that we almost a year that we started doing webinar sessions for the Ruby community. So I personally enjoy them a lot. And obviously I do enjoy meeting everyone who comes in and takes out the time for the webinar sessions. It's honestly really great. One question I would like to ask from the audience, like a kind of like a closing statement, is that do let me know, what do you guys like in terms of like the webinar sessions? Do you guys prefer live demos, or do you prefer like presentations, or whatever it is that your preference is? Do let me know. Noman, thank you so much for taking out the time. It was honestly a huge pleasure having you. It was definitely a huge learning curve for me, because I feel like I'm the Ruby on Rails beginner in this whole scenario.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, every single time, I learn something new. So it's good. Like, apart from marketing, I feel like, I'm becoming a developer day by day. So
Good to know.